Once upon a time there lived an old man and an old woman in a small house on the edge of the forest. Everything in their life was arguing, only one thing was missing: the old man and the old woman did not have children. Once the old man asked to bake a gingerbread in the shape of a little man. The old woman looked into the barn, and there was almost no flour left. She took a bowl, scrubbed it along the box, swept it along the bottom, and a handful of 2 handfuls of flour gathered. The old woman kneaded the dough with sour cream, and when she was rolling out a gingerbread on the table, she took it and made it in the shape of a little man with arms, legs, with a head, and put it in the oven. After a while, the old woman came up to see if the gingerbread was baked, took it and put it on the window to cool. The gingerbread man cooled down, lay down, but suddenly got up and ran as fast as possible out of the house, from the window to the bench, from the bench to the floor, across the floor and to the doors, jumped over the threshold to the porch, from the porch to the courtyard, from the courtyard to the gate, farther and farther. The old woman called her husband, and they both rushed after him. But it's not so easy to catch the gingerbread man. Now, he has already reached the field where the peasants were threshing their crops. Running past, the gingerbread man shouted at them that he had already run away from the old woman and the old man, and he would easily run away from them too. The peasants heard this and ran after him. But no matter how fast they ran, they could not catch up with him. A gingerbread man ran up to the field where the mowers were mowing the grass. Running past, he shouted to them that he had already run away from the old woman, and from the old man, and from the peasants, and he would easily run away from them too. The mows could not stand such ridicule. Everyone rushed after the gingerbread man. They run as fast as they can, but they cannot catch up. And towards the little man the cow is walking, he shouted to her that he had already run away from the old woman, and from the old man, and from the peasants, and from the mowers, and he would easily run away from her too. The cow got angry, and also rushed after the gingerbread man. Only he cannot catch up. And to meet him a pig. The little man shouted that he had already fled from the old woman, and from the old man, and from the peasants, and from the mowers, and from the cow, and he would easily run away from her too. A pig screeched and ran after. Only she could not catch up, she was too fat. A gingerbread man runs along the road, and a hare meets him. The little man said that he had already run away from the old woman, and from the old man, and from the peasants, and from the mowers, and from the cow, and from the pig, and he would easily run away from him too. The hare heard this and ran after him. Nor can he catch up with the little man, only the hare saw him. A gingerbread man runs, and a wolf meets him. "I will eat you," says. And the little man answered him that he had already fled from the old woman, and from the old man, and from the peasants, and from the mowers, and from the cow, and from the pig, and from the hare, and he would easily run away from him too. The wolf growled and rushed at the gingerbread man, and he dodged and ran as fast as he could. Only the wolf saw him. A gingerbread man is running, and a huge bear is meeting him. His little man was not afraid, but shouted that he had already fled from the old woman, and from the old man, and from the peasants, and from the mowers, and from the cow, and from the pig, and from the hare, and from the wolf, and he would easily run away from him too. A ferocious bear stamped his foot and ran after him. But the bear was too slow to catch up with the fast gingerbread man. A gingerbread man runs, and a fox meets him. The fox was very cunning, but the little man did not know this. Therefore, out of habit, he began to shout that he had already fled from the old woman, and from the old man, and from the peasants, and from the mowers, and from the cow, and from the pig, and from the hare, and from the wolf, and from the bear, which means he will easily run away from her too. The fox listened to the end, and said that she was very old, did not hear anything. She came closer to the little man and asked him to repeat it. Obeyed her silly gingerbread man and began to brag again. The fox listened to the end and said that she still did not hear anything. She came even closer to the little man and asked him to repeat it again. The gingerbread man agreed, and then only he started anew when the fox pounced on him and ate it. And the gingerbread man no longer bragged about. There lived a husband and wife. For a long time they already wanted to have a child, but he was not there. One day, my wife fell ill. The husband asked her what she wants the most. The wife replied that there was a magnificent garden nearby, where many of the most beautiful flowers grow. There is a beautiful Rapunzel in the garden. It looked so fresh and so green that she really wanted to taste it. But the garden was surrounded by a high fence, and no one dared to enter it, since this garden belonged to one witch. She possessed great power, and everyone in the world feared her. The husband loved his wife very much, and decided to get a Rapunzel for her, no matter what it cost him. And so at dusk he climbed over the stone fence into the sorceress's garden, in a hurry picked up a whole handful of green Rapunzel, and brought it to his wife. She immediately made herself a salad from it, and ate greedily. She liked this salad so much that the next day she wanted even more than before. The husband made his way into the garden again, but the witch was already standing in front of him. She glared at him angrily and said that he would pay a lot for stealing the Rapunzel. He asked the witch not to be angry, because he tore off the Rapunzel for his wife, who was very ill. And he loves her so much.
Okay.
The witch's anger passed a little, and she said that if it was true, she would allow him to collect as much Rapunzel as he wanted, but on one condition. He will have to give the witch the child who will be born to his wife. The husband agreed with fear. When the wife gave birth to a daughter, the witch immediately appeared, took the child with her, and named her Rapunzel. Rapunzel became the most beautiful girl in the world. When she was 12 years old, the witch locked her in a tower. That tower was in the forest, and it had no doors or stairs. Only at the very top was a small window. When the witch wanted to climb the tower, she called Rapunzel to pull her sides down. And Rapunzel had long, beautiful hair. She hears the voice of the witch, loosens her braids, ties them up to the window hook, and the hair falls down, and the witch then climbs up, clinging to them. Several years passed, and the king's son happened to ride a horse through the forest where the tower stood. Suddenly he heard singing, and it was so pleasant that he stopped and began to listen. Rapunzel sang it in her wonderful voice. The prince wanted to climb up. He began to look for the entrance to the tower, but it was impossible to find him. He once saw how the witch climbs up the braids that Rapunzel lowered her. And the next day, when it was already getting dark, the prince drove up to the tower and called Rapunzel. She heard, pulled her braids down, and the prince climbed up. Rapunzel, seeing that a man she had never seen came to her, was very frightened at first. But the prince spoke to her affectionately, and said that his heart was so touched by the singing that he decided to see her without fail. Then Rapunzel ceased to be afraid, and when he asked if she agreed to marry him, she gave her consent and held out her hand to him. But they just did not know how to go down together. They figured out that when the prince came, he would always take a piece of silk with him, and Rapunzel would weave a ladder out of it. And when the ladder is ready, they will go down it together and leave. The sorceress did not notice anything until one day Rapunzel asked why it is easier to drag the prince up. The sorceress understood everything, got angry and clutched in rage at Rapunzel's beautiful hair. I wrapped them around my left arm several times, and with my right grabbed the scissors and cut them off. She took the sorceress into the dense thicket of Rapunzel and hid her there. She tied the severed braids to the window hook, and when the prince appeared, she pulled them down. The prince climbed up and saw the witch. She looked at him with her malicious look and said that he would never see Rapunzel. The king's son was beside himself with grief and jumped out of the tower in despair, but the thorny thorns of the bushes, on which he fell, gouged out his eyes. The blind prince wandered for several years in grief and sorrow through the forest, all the time grieving and crying for his beloved lost. Once he went into a dense thicket. Suddenly the prince heard someone singing. It seemed so familiar to him, and he went to meet him. When he came closer, Rapunzel recognized him, threw herself on his neck and cried bitterly with joy. 2 tears fell in his eyes, and the prince regained his sight and began to see as before. He brought her to his kingdom, and they lived for many, many years in happiness and joy.